Ask anyone what caused the biggest revolution in technology and control, and my guess is they'll say the internet. And they're right. It's the OG, the revolutionary technology which everything else follows. But it was the early internet which turned the tables. It transcended the rules, the regulations, the cultural norms, language, age, religion, politics, and even physical borders. With just a handful of open protocols, it quickly became the place of unlimited creativity where anyone could express themselves however they wanted, free from oppression or censorship. You could connect with anyone on the planet. Through email, through message boards, anyone could join. All you needed was access to a computer with an internet connection. The early internet was the original global town square, the commons, the public sphere. I know all this because I googled it. Well, technically I asked ChatGPT first, but then I had to Google to fact check it and rewrite it. You see, unfortunately, I was 9 years old when the dot-com bubble burst, so that magical, crazy utopia of the early internet is just a fairy tale to me. The internet I grew up with is a bit different. So to kick things off, it seems fitting that we should revisit the revolution which started it all. The internet.
The attention economy pits you against me. Money makes no sense these days, and the robots are taking jobs. The planet is in peril, but we can set us free. Put our brains together if we lead with our hearts. Gotta take back control from the greedy and the corporate. Gotta take back control to the hands of the people. Collaborate and listen. We learn and we grow. Build the future that we want.
Welcome to the first episode of Take Back Control, a new project I've started to explore how we can take back control from technology with technology. If you want to get a feel for what this podcast and project is about, feel free to listen to the trailer first. Today, we're kicking things off by talking about where the next revolution starts, and we're starting with the OG of revolutionary tech, the internet, and discussing how we can fix it. If you look online for videos showing people in the 90s talking about the free, open, exciting Wild West of the early internet, and then compare it to someone today talking about what we have, you'll notice it sounds pretty different. There's a really great interview with David Bowie where Jeremy Paxman asks him about his predictions for the internet, and in hindsight he makes some really prescient predictions. Throughout the interview he's unable to contain his excitement, and you just don't see that these days. I'll put a link in the show notes, but you should definitely watch it. And it's not just that technology's moved on, I think something's missing. Like intuitively, I think we all get the sense that something isn't quite right with the internet today. Over the last decade, you'll have seen headlines like these. It's digital heroin, how screens turn kids into psychotic junkies. That was the New York Post, August 27th, 2016. The internet is destroying society, sobering research shows. CNET, March 30th, 2017. I was wrong, too much tech is ruining lives. Washington Post, April 17th, 2018. Big Tech, Out of Control Capitalism and the End of Civilization. Scientific American, October 7th, 2020. The internet is destroying our brains, but we can't quit. It's a factory we're forced to work in without any pay. Business Insider, June 2021. And then last year, your attention didn't collapse, it was stolen. That was The Guardian, January 2nd, 2022. And then the internet is broken, how do we fix it? New York Times, May 27th, 2022. So you've heard it all before, the same rhetoric, the blaming big tech or privatization or greedy investors, all kind of easy targets, but rarely do you finish reading these articles and get a sense that you can actually do something about it. Well, today we're doing that. By the end of this episode, I hope you'll have a better appreciation for why the internet is the way it is, and maybe a little hope and optimism about what we can do to fix it. So when I first started working in tech, I was lucky. I caught the smartphone revolution just as it got into full swing. And as the internet found its way into the hands of every man, woman and child on the planet. I saw the World Wide Web go from having separate mobile sites to mobile-friendly sites, then mobile-first, and ultimately mobile-only with lockdown app stores for each operating system that you had a phone for. I championed it at work and how smartphones changed our relationship with the internet for the better. It untethered the internet from our homes and offices. It lowered the barrier to get online to the point where, by 2014, phones outnumbered people on the planet. It gave the internet arms and legs where it could reach every corner of the globe. And then it gave the internet eyes and ears and an array of sensors which ultimately led to wearables and IoT-enabled smart devices. Smartphones were my generation's dot-com moment. They connected 5 billion people to the internet. and brought its potential to every fragment of our lives. But even with all this, I never really experienced that boundless, flourishing network described by pioneers in the 90s or David Bowie in that interview. It was cool, but it was increasingly becoming closed, locked down, restrictive, and dominated by just a handful of companies. When Tim Berners-Lee and pioneers throughout the 80s and 90s championed a vision of the World Wide Web, it was an open, decentralized platform for sharing information and for connecting people around the world. In his book, Weaving the Web, the original design and ultimate destiny of the World Wide Web, Tim says, the system had to have one fundamental property. It had to be completely decentralized. That would be the only way a new person somewhere could start using it without asking for access from anyone else. And that would be the only way the system could scale, so that as more people use it, it wouldn't get bogged down. There's no central computer for controlling the web, no single network on which these protocols worked, not even an organization anywhere that ran the web. I told people that the web was like a market economy. In a market economy, anybody can trade with anybody, and they don't have to go to a market square to do it. So, what happened to that open, decentralized platform? That market economy with no central controlling organization that Tim Berners-Lee talked about? Some people will shortcut this question and blame big tech or capitalism, but I've been thinking about this for a long time now, and I've come to the conclusion that whilst the dot-com bubble signaled the end of the open internet, the cause was more subtle. You see, aside from all the investor frenzy in dot-com stocks, there was no clear way to make money for people and companies creating content and services on the early internet. Don't forget, online payments channels didn't exist yet. There's no crypto or internet money at this point, no Apple Pay or Stripe. So once the investor seed funding ran out, well, the company basically died. What arose from the ashes of the dot-com bubble is the internet I grew up with. And along with a new breed of internet startups came a solution to the funding dilemma. You see, I lied earlier. Before the dot-com bubble burst, there was a way websites could make money from content. They could sell advertising real estate as banner ads on the websites. This kind of mirrored the physical world where you pay to lease that advertising real estate. It was clunky, slow, clearly wasn't enough to prop up the overinflated valuations placed on dot-com companies at the time. But in the year 2000, one small shift to that business model changed everything. A more sophisticated search engine called GoTo.com found a new model, pay-per-click, where advertisers paid the search engine each time their sponsored result was clicked on. This was a lot more efficient. Instead of leasing virtual ad space regardless of whether people even notice it, you had a business model where you only paid when an advert generated clicks, genuine user engagement. This was infinitely more efficient. It worked. It worked extremely well. Around the same time as GoTo.com, Google launched AdWords, and before long, all websites could copy the pay-per-click model, renting ad space on their websites to the search engines to place ads. Finally, this gave the internet a funding mechanism it desperately needed. Any new web startup in the post-dot-com bubble era could attract investment piggybacking on this revolutionary pay-per-click business model. The only metrics that mattered were audience growth and audience attention. And just like that, you could make money on the internet. And just like that, the attention economy was born. The companies that benefit most from this, you can imagine. They're the search engines and fast-growing social media companies with strong network effects. The only limiting factor was getting people online. But then, 2007, the iPhone comes along, the internet goes mobile, and the rest, as they say, is history. You might be sat there thinking, hold on, Jonathan. The internet is a lot more than just advertising revenue. Come on, let's not get carried away here. And I agree. When you step back and look at the internet, it's difficult to see it. But when you start to analyse how most of the modern internet is actually funded and who runs it, it starts to become a little bit more blurry. See, in 2022, 5 companies owned over 50% of the global advertising revenue. And 2 of those companies, Amazon and Google, also own 44% of the global cloud infrastructure market, which much of the internet runs on. In Q4 2022, just 3 apps, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, made up over 65% of social network ad revenue. And Google, who own the largest share of global advertising revenue, is also the biggest contributor to open source code, meaning many open source internet services have their origins ultimately funded by this advertising economy. Individuals trying to make a living on the internet inevitably adapt to prioritize high traffic and ad revenue. Look at podcasters, YouTubers, esports gamers, the news media, and influencers. Almost the entire digital content creation on the internet runs on some form of advertising revenue. And don't get me wrong, these aren't all bad things. Like I said before, without this funding model, the internet might have struggled to get going. A lot of people have benefited from this. Now we have 5 billion people with access to the internet. Without pay-per-click, you don't get a funding model to build so much so quickly. And Google contributing to open source code, I mean, we see the benefits all the time. For instance, the T in ChatGPT means transformer. It was created by Google to enhance natural language search results and then open sourced for anyone else to use. So this is part of our innovation cycle now, and it has its benefits. So I know what you're thinking. After the dot-com bubble, we found a business model to fund companies on the internet. It sounds pretty good, right? Businesses and creatives can make a lot of money through ad revenue. The big giants keep things running and contribute a lot to open source community, the cloud infrastructure, and they also give us a lot of services for free. So what's not to love? I mean, between Alphabet and Meta, these internet advertising giants provide free services in the form of messenger apps, social media, streaming platforms, email clients, navigation apps, translators, browsers, even entire operating systems. It sounds pretty good to me, right? Well, this is where it gets interesting. See, my generation, the ones who first used the internet after the dot-com bubble burst, we've been conditioned to believe that the internet and most of its services are free. But they aren't free. They never were. But a generation of people, maybe the most people who've ever lived on this planet, all assume that at its core, the internet is free. Like all things, there are negative externalities. So here's some of the unintended consequences that an attention economy built on this insatiable hunger to get users to click on ads actually leads to. So we now have extensive ad tracking software and surveillance throughout the internet, from mobile apps to web browsers to operating systems to commercial websites. They're all incentivized to track you. And by putting a value on the decision to click on an ad, ownership and use of user data became the most valuable prize on the internet. This has created an incentive to harvest more behavioral data and use it to maximize that likelihood that you will click on an ad. This hunger to grab user attention creates a kind of dangerous goal to maximize clicks at the expense of everything else. And it turns out, making people really angry makes them even more engaged and is great for clicks. So we've now created a financial incentive to keep people pretty angry. Of course, the smaller, innovative alternative options get squeezed out to the fringes due to market forces, as they don't lead to more ad revenue. If they somehow succeed and provide competition for users, the only logical incentive for any incumbent is to acquire them, or just copy their features that make them great. Now that user growth is the main valuation metric investors care about, competition for users can't exist. This has two effects. It means that Meta can acquire WhatsApp and Instagram and Oculus, and yet simultaneously struggle to make anything actually new or innovative themselves. The public goods of the internet have no viable financing model to maintain and restore them without access to ads. This is why Wikipedia runs on volunteers and shamelessly begging you every year to keep the lights on. And whilst it's nice that the internet advertising giants contribute to open source code, many of the open source alternatives are still beholden to their advertising masters to survive. This is why the Mozilla Foundation, who make popular open source privacy-focused software, make Google the default search engine in their Firefox browser. In return, they get $500 million a year from Google. And finally, I guess it needs to be said, once you start playing this game in the attention economy, you can't stop. Even if you want to, investors will punish you if your user growth slows or your ad revenue drops. So to stay relevant, you need to capture more behavioral data, more users, and get more of your users' limited remaining attention. So the attention-based funding mechanism, the free services, they come at a cost. And you can see the picture painted in those headlines earlier on of consolidation, control, surveillance, emotional manipulation, and eroded user rights. Today's internet is broken, and it isn't the fault of big tech or capitalism or regulators. It was never really their responsibility to fix it. See, the early internet thrived because it was collaborative, open, decentralized, and it flourished because of the people who made it. The creators, the developers, the radicals and pioneers, they were the users, not the product. This attention-based advertising model, it gave the internet companies a way to make money, sure, but it changed our relationship into one where our attention became a commodity. We've been fooled into thinking that the internet is free and open, but really, we pay for it with our time, with our freedom, with our data, and ultimately with our clicks. If we want to change things and create a better internet, we need to target the roots of what got us here in the first place. And for that, we need a better funding mechanism for innovators on the internet in the spirit of the original World Wide Web. When Tim Berners-Lee describes the web as a market economy where you can trade with anyone without needing a marketplace, he's describing what the internet could look like. So, if we set out to do this, we need the following. We need to create incentivized funding mechanisms to keep the infrastructure of the internet running. And if we do this right, it creates an incentive for anyone and everyone to join in and run servers and infrastructure on the internet. We now have many options for better user-centric financing models, such as microtransactions, subscription services, or even tokenized economic models to create non-advertising revenue streams for web companies. Instead of letting advertisers put a price on user attention and chasing endless user growth, companies could put a price on user participation, creating a free marketplace for membership and access to the better services. Ownership matters, so we need to adopt internet protocols which grant ownership rights to the creators and the users, not just the platforms. If you created something, you should own it, and you should be able to trade it. And that market economy can go anywhere in the world, not just inside someone else's platform. And if you don't mind ads, click on them, but you should be paid to click on them. If you want a behavior, I think you need to buy it from the user, not some data broker. Then you've got privacy. Privacy is a universal and basic right. If we're going to put a peer-to-peer market economy on the internet and break this model, we need to protect users' data and privacy at a protocol level, not just trust some third party to keep our data safe. Finally, the tough one. We need to get used to paying other people and companies for their services. The free internet days are over, but remember the flip side of that is that also means when you contribute to the open internet, you get paid. So just to be clear, I'm not advocating for some subscription model like Netflix, Spotify, or Twitter Blue. I think this marketplace for the open internet goes so much further than that. If we do it right, it should look like a web of open collaborative services, buzzing with human participation and innovation, not just a content consumption subscription. The path to get there is complicated, and it's going to take a lot of experimentation and collective effort. It also means we need to get really comfortable paying for the services we use on the internet. But it also means we need to join in and start contributing to those services as well. Like all market economies, these incentive mechanisms are essential to fund an open internet, which could be self-sufficient, self-healing, self-securing, and self-improving. I know, it's quite heavy. This is hard to imagine. So where does that leave us today? Well, I guess we can sum it up like this. Stop blaming big tech or greedy capitalists. The internet needed a kickstart to fund the innovation and get it going. But sure, we lost something along the way. I think we can fix it with technology and tools that already exist to open up the internet and give control back to the users. But to succeed, we need to focus on sustainable incentive mechanisms which fund the innovators, creators, and infrastructure on the internet. Whether you call it the decentralized web, the Fediverse, Web3, blockchain, or just the internet, we need to stay true to the original vision of decentralization, openness, and freedom. And I don't think we can rely on regulation to fix this. This original vision of the internet isn't run by politicians or governments. It's run by us, just people all across the globe. It's up to us to fix it. So don't worry if some of this doesn't make sense or sounds impossible or flawed or just plain confusing. This is the first episode to get us started. We're going to take our time and dive deeper into these concepts and examples over the next few weeks, months, and probably years. If you're interested in learning more, I'll share the links to the articles I've mentioned here in the show notes. One of the papers I came across which really helped me frame my ideas was As the Pirates Become CEOs, The Closing of the Open Internet by Zeynep Tufekci. It was published in 2016, but you've probably come across her without knowing in columns in Wired Magazine, New York Times, or on her TED Talks. If you enjoyed this first episode, please leave a review on whatever podcast app you're using. And if you want to get more involved in the conversation, please join the Discord. This episode was written, recorded, and edited by me, Jonathan Tipper. The theme song is by Jonathan Mann, and the artwork for this episode was created using Midjourney. All the backing soundtracks are from Epidemic Sounds. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.